All 10 of the world's most populated countries have leaders, or a leader-elect, over the age of 70. Compare that to a decade ago, when that was true for only one country.
Well, more than half of the world at this point lives in a country where a leader is over 70.
And those leaders are on average more than 40 years older than their population's median age. Here's why the world's politicians are increasingly older than their constituents, and what it means for policies and political engagement around the globe. Globally, the median age of world leaders is 62, with most of them in their 50s and 60s. And the gap in age between leaders and their constituents is more pronounced in certain regions, like sub-Saharan Africa, where the population has been growing younger, but leaders are some of the oldest globally. Cameroon has the world's oldest in Paul Biya.
I do so swear.
Who, at 91, has been in power for more than 40 years. But there are some exceptions.
In Europe, people are older, but politicians aren't.
The cases where we often tend to see particularly younger leaders or exceptions to this rule are often in countries that have very strong parties and a strong party system. Countries where parties get very actively involved in recruiting young people into their ranks.
In the US, concerns about age have filled the election cycle.
Don't you think we need to have mental competency tests for anyone over the age of 75?
When they face off in the 2024 election, President Joe Biden and Donald Trump will be the oldest candidates in US history, again.
I know it may not look like it, but I've been around a while.
US presidents' ages have been trending upwards in the last century. But it's not just the president. In 2021, the US Congress was the oldest on record.
It's very important for the legitimacy of democracy that politicians actually are seen to reflect and represent the people who are voting.
But that representation is lopsided when it comes to age. 39% of voting-age Americans are under 40, but only 8.3% of US legislators in the House of Representatives are, down from 22% in 1981. And worldwide, the median age of legislators has trended upwards in the past few decades.
So there are a number of reasons why we are seeing this trend. One, of course, is medical technology is just getting better and it's spread more widely. The broad rise of autocracy in the world is something that is likely going to lead to more older leaders.
Two leaders of those 10 most populated countries, Vladimir Putin and Xi Jinping, have deepened their power in Russia and China. 35% of the world's population is living in countries deemed to be moving towards autocracy, according to research institute VDem. But in non-autocratic states, it can be hard for younger candidates to run in costly elections.
It's just harder to get money if you're young. Maybe you were born with it, but if you weren't born with it, you then have to go to people to give you that money, and they tend to be older, and you have to persuade them to back you.
The U.S. had its most expensive election in 2020 at $14 billion.
It's not the only place where individual candidates are asked to amass a sort of war chest to be able to gain access to office. This is very much the case in countries in Asia, in Japan, and in South Korea, right, which are, right there with the United States of having very few young people in government.
And with more career politicians, younger candidates may not have as many opportunities to run. In the U.S., incumbent re-election rates have never dropped below 85% in the House. Incumbents also have an advantage around the world.
Once you get your foot in the door, you can often stay there for quite some time. To be clear, I think there are a lot of positives to having people who know how to get things done, who have rich networks that allow them to actually see policy through.
But the overrepresentation of older politicians could mean that
young people in particular are just less interested in, say, a given election when the leaders are much older than them.
Around the world, youth voter turnout is lower than the rest of the voting age population. In a survey across 33 countries, 44% of young adults from 18 to 29 said they always voted, compared to 60% of the entire population. Yet the younger end of the electorate is still valuable for candidates, and politicians around the world have tried to appeal to younger voters.
In the United States, one of the funniest recent examples was Joe Biden setting up his own TikTok recently, and the first caption was titled, "LOL, hey guys."
If I didn't say I was for the Eagles, and I'd be sleeping alone.
To go back to Indonesia, Prabowo Subianto, this ex-general with a very controversial record, was now trying to appeal to youth. He danced, he did this jig. These dances became viral, and supporters picked it up and made their own interpretations, and suddenly he became this dancing grandpa who cuddled cats. One thing that political scientists worry about is essentially a vicious circle where young people get demoralized because they feel like their options are only older leaders, they maybe don't vote.
So politicians might favor policies important to those who voted for them and ignore those that are more important to younger people.
There's all sorts of policies in the world that disproportionately affect young people. Policies on education, unemployment, childcare.
That was the case in Japan, where younger mayors were more likely to increase spending on childcare, which was important to younger voters.
Younger politicians were much more likely to dedicate that spending toward investment for the long term. These younger politicians potentially have greater concern for the future, particularly in a country like Japan that faces these challenges for the social welfare budget of a rapidly aging population and declining birth rates.
And if younger voters feel like their interests aren't represented, it can lead to a lack of trust in the government.
Our planet's on fire!
The world's changing very fast. There are a lot of new big challenges that we face. It can make young people question the legitimacy of the system if the politicians who are attempting or sort of attempting to tackle these problems are quite a bit older.
That's particularly true when it comes to rapidly advancing tech and social media.
Well, how do you sustain a business model in which users don't pay for your service?
Senator, we run ads.
How does that show up on a 7-year-old's iPhone who's playing a kid's game?
Congressman, iPhone is made by a different company.
So if you don't have a sort of greater age diversity at the decision-making table, then you're really missing out on people who have this direct personal experience, much greater familiarity with how technology is changing, and can use that expertise to all of our advantage.